Hi, welcome to this lecture entitled The Role of Ethics, Policy, Laws, and Norms in Cybersecurity. You maybe haven't seen this image for a while. I think that Mark and I presented it certainly in the overview of the course. I just wanted to point out that we are rounding the bend. We're over here in Module 5, Cybersecurity in Context, as you know. And Module 5 is going to connect to some of the ideas that we started with in Module 1, Trustworthy Cyberspace. This is Lesson 1 of Module 5. The lesson is entitled One for All for One, How Laws and Norms Secure Cyberspace. This is a really important topic to me. As a matter of fact, what I really wish is that you and I were sitting in a classroom or a park or an art gallery or a cafe talking about this. But since it's a distributed course and it's self-paced, the best that I could do was to try to bring some of this to life through a short lecture. And my invitation is if you like any of these topics or you want to discuss an idea that gets sparked because of this lecture or because of this lesson, I hope you reach out to me. So I just have two learning objectives. I want you to gain a grounded understanding of ethics. So we're going to take a few minutes and really try to work with some definitions that help us ground ourselves. And it's important, I think, to ground yourself because I really want you to be able to use this. Cybersecurity is full of ethical priorities, things that matter, things that we want to have in our society. And those ethical priorities often compete. And so I want you to be able to identify competing ethical priorities. So we're going to start with a few definitions. Ethics itself is a word derived from the Greek word ethos. Ethos means character. It also means custom, habit, and way of life. And you probably already know this, but if we were to look at the really early Greek origins of ethics, as far back as Homer, coming up into Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, like 9th to 1st century BC, they were really concerned with answering the question, what is the nature of good? And it wasn't until the first few centuries AD, due to Roman and religious influences, that ethics started to take on the second branch, which is what does it mean to do good? What does it mean to be good? So ethics has both pieces in it. What's the nature of good? And what does it mean to do good or to be good? And I think of them as the roots of the tree. And then if you can both think about what's the nature of good, what does it mean to be good, do good, then you can understand how we get the policies, the laws, and the norms that we have in order to try to shape behavior so that people do good, so that people are good, so that it is good, the good that we have defined. I think that these modern day dictionary definitions kind of embody much of what I just had on that previous slide. You could go to Webster's, you could go to any other dictionary, and you would get definitions like this. Ethics is a set of moral principles. Ethics is a theory or a system of moral values. I like that word, values. Second definition, ethics is a consciousness of moral importance. So to me, that connotes that we're going to be thinking about things as being either more important, less important, or unimportant. The third bullet, ethics, is the principles of conduct governing an individual or a group. And that reminds me of that, what does it mean to do good, be good? Question on the last slide. Fourth definition, ethics is a set of moral issues. So we're obviously talking about something that is plural here, a set of moral issues. And then lastly, ethics is an actual discipline that deals with what is good and bad and deals with, that's the nature, what is good, what is bad, and deals with how do we do good, be good, deals with moral duty and obligation. So when I think about the last two slides, I think about the fact that doing good is inseparable from defining what good is. We act on what we believe is good, but we also redefine what is good through our actions and through evolving circumstances. And I think, to me, I was born in 1979. I was born before the age of cyber systems. And so I have seen the advent of computing, and it certainly represents evolving circumstances to me. And so to me, ethics is really, really old, but it's forever new, it's forever relevant because of our evolving circumstances. We constantly need to be revisiting what is good and what does it mean to be good and do good in the face of evolving circumstances. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you see a couple of other questions. These are other ways of asking what is good or thinking about ethics in terms of that abstract notion of good. What values are we trying to uphold? And usually there are many values that we are trying to uphold. And so I kind of foreshadowed this when I said what's important, what's unimportant, when I talked about that on the last slide. So how should we prioritize our values? In what circumstances? Under what conditions? And how should our values that we're trying to uphold and our priorities in their circumstances, in their conditions, how should they shape our decisions, right? So ethics is always about questions like that. But ethics is also about questions on the right-hand side of the screen. What actions should we now take? What policies, what political structures will help us realize these values that we're trying to uphold? What laws will affect the good that we have defined, or the competing goods? What norms will lead us to the desired outcomes? So I'm taking the time to talk about this because I want you to be able to always see the two branches of ethics. I want you to see policies, laws, norms, and I want you to be able to step back away from them and try to see them in terms of the values that they're trying to uphold. And because there are often multiple values that compete, I want you to be able to see those competing values, right? Because you can't go forward and make good decisions if you can't see what you're trying to uphold and try and see when those things are conflicting. So I have a simple example up here, healthcare allocation during a crisis. We can all think about a hospital during a pandemic. with 5 ventilators, yet twice as many critically ill patients. How to decide who gets a ventilator, right? So ethics would first of all be thinking about who gets to decide, and why would that produce the good that we want in our society? Why would that help us uphold the value or values that we've identified we want? And then if we know who gets to decide, how do they decide? How do they prioritize? Right? So ethics helps us think about what matters. It's not going to help us think about, do we prioritize by age? Do we prioritize by survival? It doesn't tell us the answer to the question. Ethics says, what do we value? And if we value that, what should we do in this circumstance? What would be the best thing to do in this circumstance? Cybersecurity is full of these kinds of dilemmas. In cybersecurity, ethics helps us think about what is even a breach of trust. When we talked about trust and trustworthiness in Module 1, we've talked about it throughout this entire course, in fact. Yeah. And so ethics is what's going to help us try to think through what really is a breach of trust. How important is it that we have trust? Is that a value that we want to uphold? And if so, when has it been violated? Ethics helps us think about things like privacy versus security. And we're going to look at 8 examples on the next slide. If you had perfect security, if you knew everything about everyone all of the time, which is what the philosopher Jeremy Bentham called the panopticon. And current contemporary philosophers sometimes talk about the digital panopticon. But the more security you have, the more you know everything about everyone all of the time, the less privacy you have, right? So security is something that we want to uphold, but privacy is also something that we want to uphold. How do we uphold them both? Under what circumstances? For whom? How do we? Right? It's not a single line that we're drawing. It's multiple bends in trying to navigate upholding privacy and security. When there is a harm, and we have talked so often in this course about harm, when there is a harm, who should bear the responsibility, right? Who should be responsible for mitigating it? Who should be punished? Who should be compensated? Who was wronged? So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at 8 sentences, and we're going to stop and we're going to think about competing ethical values, priorities that we're trying to uphold. And we're going to go through them a little bit slowly because I want to set you up to do an exercise where you do this on your own. I think I said earlier, to me, cybersecurity is full of ethical issues, full of ethical values that often compete with each other. And before you could even think about what should be done in a particular situation, you have to be able to see the things that are competing with each other. And that's really the purpose of the next slide, and that's the purpose of the exercise. All right, so competing ethical priorities. The first one, we could improve cybersecurity through increased surveillance, but that might harm privacy. We want to live in a society that provides protection, but we also want to live in a society that provides privacy. What is competing here? Protection and privacy. Number 2, organizations need to disclose security breaches. But as soon as an organization says, we've been breached, they become more vulnerable. It shows that they are weak. And it signals to attackers, oh, they're weak. So it actually makes them vulnerable, and it can cause a sense of panic in society. So what do? We want to live in a society that has a lot of transparency. That's why we think it's important to disclose breaches. But we also want to protect confidentiality, and we want efficiency. What values do we uphold? What is more important? There are no easy answers here. There are no easy answers. Let's look at number 3. Open internet policies allow freedom of expression. Free speech, that certainly isn't a value that we can all understand in the United States. But open internet policies also are a conduit for cyber profiling, for harassment, and they can propagate misinformation. All of those things can be harmful. We also want to live in a society that prevents or mitigates harm. Free speech, harm prevention. Number 4, we live in a society here in the United States that is driven by innovation. In this particular sentence, it says companies rush AI-powered cybersecurity tools. It could be companies rush software to market. Companies rush hardware to market without fully testing them. So we value innovation, we value economic competitiveness, but we also value safety. And sometimes those two things compete and conflict and contradict. Number 5, protecting data integrity. We want data, whether it's in storage, in transit, or in use. We want data to be accurate because we want information to be accurate. But systems need to be updated so systems can perform their functions. And sometimes a system update can compromise data integrity. Integrity, reliability. How do we balance those two competing ethical priorities, things that we value? 6, 7, and 8 go together just a little bit. So let's see if you can kind of follow the thread. Companies have a lot of data. So we want to hold companies accountable for failing to secure customer data. We want them to be liable for breaches, right? This could be Home Depot, this could be Target, this could be Marriott, this could be Equifax. So many organizations that have our data. So we want them to be responsible. We've given them our data. They should be doing things to secure it. But is it really reasonable to expect companies to be responsible against nation state actors, right? That's why we have an intelligence community, is to combat foreign adversaries. So who really should be liable? And how do we get there? Doesn't seem right to make them liable. It seems like the federal government ought to be liable, but yet we want them to be responsible. Gosh, what if that company isn't Marriott? A global company with a high net worth. What if it's a medium-sized business? What if it's a small business? We value small business in the United States. What if it's a small business? Should we hold companies accountable for failing to secure customer data if it disadvantages small businesses? Right? That's kind of favoring monopolies. That's sort of unfair to people who have fewer resources who are just trying to get started. So responsibility versus fairness. And then the last one brings it all the way down to, right? Sometimes we say in cybersecurity, humans are the weakest link. And we've talked about phishing in this course, right? So what if we said, well, everybody in every organization needs to have mandatory phishing training so they quit falling for these phishing attempts? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are a Fortune 500 mega company with all sorts of wealth, or you're a startup small business trying to eke out an existence with a really cool innovation, but you haven't made it yet. You're still struggling to survive. Should we push that expectation, that requirement on every organization? Do we really need that level of trust? Or do we still want smaller startup companies just to be able to survive? By pushing that level of trust, it pushes some people out of the market altogether. So cybersecurity, as I said, is full of competing ethical priorities. Part of it is because cybersecurity is so pervasive, right? It cuts across all industry sectors. It cuts across all organizational sizes. So it's so pervasive that it brings us to realize that it is full of competing ethical priorities. And so now what I want you to do is to practice thinking on your own about these competing ethical priorities. If you would go do the exercise in Canvas entitled Identify the Ethical Dilemma or Dilemmas. All right, that's it for this one, and I'll see you, I think, for one more lecture in the course. Thank you.